In this video, I'm going to demonstrate an Excel function called XLOOKUP, which is basically very similar to VLOOKUP, which you might have used in a previous class. So I'm going to do a quick demonstration of VLOOKUP to refresh your memory. The first thing we got to ask is, why would I use either of these functions, VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP? What is their purpose? So let's say your boss hands you 10 names and says, I need to calculate the monthly insurance contribution, which is 10% of their monthly salary. So out of an HR database, I've downloaded employee information. I have their annual salary. I just need to pull that over here so I can divide it by 12 and then multiply that by 10%. So I need to pull information from one part of the spreadsheet over to another part, all right? And it's going to be based, in this case, on a person's name. That's an example of using VLOOKUP or XLOOKUP. Very often you use these tools. I'll give you another example. Let's say I have some clients and I've downloaded things that they've purchased, which includes their SKU, but I don't know the item name or the item price. That information comes from a lookup table, maybe from our product database. So I have the SKU, and this table includes the description and the price. And same thing, let's say I know how much they've spent, but now I need to calculate the delivery fee. Well, the delivery fee in this case is based on the price. So if they spent between $0 and $500, we charge them $50. From $500 to $1,000, we'll charge them $75. Anyway, you get the idea. Well, I'm going to have to look up that information so I can calculate the total due. I'll add it to the price. So those two are examples where I'm going to use XLOOKUP. I have the SKU. I now need to return some information based on that to this portion of the spreadsheet. So that's why you're using these tools. Now let's do a quick reminder of VLOOKUP. So it's equal VLOOKUP. And in this case, I'm going to look up this person's name. And notice I'm on lookup value. I'm going to type a comma. Table array is now bold. And so I select this table of employee data. And I select the whole thing, right, the entire table. If you're going to copy this down, don't forget you do need to absolute your table array. And then we have what's called the column index number, which is out of this table, this big red block. Which column of information am I trying to return? Column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's column 6 that has the base salary. And then the part that most students will forget is, am I doing an exact match or an approximate match? Meaning, do I need to find, does Kathleen Adams have to match exactly Kathleen Adams? And the answer is yes, and so you have to type the word false. If you leave it off, it's going to do a close match, and sometimes you get goofy results if you're doing a close match when you really had intended for an exact match. So that's VLOOKUP. Now, some of its limitations. Notice the name that I'm looking up has to be on the left side of the data because that column number has to be positive. I want to return column 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, whatever. If this full name column happened to be over on the right, I can't use VLOOKUP. It won't work. The other issue with VLOOKUP is, let's say somebody using your spreadsheet comes here and inserts some data into this table right here, right? Or they insert a column. Okay, so now instead of this being column 6, all of a sudden it's column 7. Well, that's going to break your VLOOKUP formula, or at least you're going to have to come through and fix it and go, oh, well, now base salary is column 7 instead of column 6. So those are a couple of the limitations of VLOOKUP. So let's do XLOOKUP because it's a little bit easier, or a better tool, I should say that. Same thing, I have a lookup value. If we're going to look up Kathleen's name, where do I look it up? You just choose a single column where it exists. So in this case, it's right here. Shift Control down arrow. I'm grabbing that column and then I am going to absolute that. But it's a single column and it doesn't matter where it's at. It could be here. It could be way over here in column P. It could be in the middle of the data. But the point is I'm looking up this person's name in this column. Cool. And now instead of an index number, it's asking for which column do we want to return the information from. So I can choose the base salary column. And now it doesn't matter if it's to the left or to the right of this lookup column. because we're just going to choose Shift Control down arrow that, and we will F4 and absolute that. So our return array said basically what this says is when I find Kathleen Adams in the red column here, I am going to return the base salary that's now in this bluish purple column. A couple more factors here that were not in VLOOKUP is what happens if I don't find her name? What do you want to put in this cell? So you could just use two quotes, which means leave the cell blank. Just leave it empty. Or you could put some kind of message, can't find, if you don't find her name. The point is you can do something, and this is optional. You don't have to put anything here. And the other one, in VLOOKUP, where we used to put true and false, we now have 4 choices. And the default choice, if you put nothing, is the exact match. So that's good. If you don't put anything, it's going to look for Kathleen Adams, that name spelled exactly. If you want it to be a close match, which we'll do an example in a minute, then you can decide, do you put -1 or 1, or then you have another choice that we won't mess with called wildcard match. And finally, then there's something about a search mode. We won't mess with that either. Those are all optional because you can tell by the square brackets. So in this case, I will go ahead and put 0 for an exact match, although it would have done that anyway. I can close up this function and now hit enter. And so it returned for Kathleen Adams the $27,600 for the base salary. If I were to put a second S on her name, put in a typo, now my error message, the if not found, comes up. And it's doing that because I have chosen an exact match. So let's go ahead and spell her name correctly again. The other thing I can do is now XLOOKUP is returning a number, which is her base salary, her annual salary. I need to, I'm not done, divide that number by 12, which then gives me her monthly salary. And then the whole point was I want to take 10% of that as her insurance contribution. So I can wrap this whole thing and go times and choose the 10%, and then of course F4 to absolute that. And so at this point I should relabel this column. That is her insurance contribution, right? XLOOKUP is returning a value. I'm dividing that value by 12 and then multiplying by B4. Anyway, now if I were to drag that down, I find everybody's base salary, divided by 12, multiplied by 10%, and I now have their insurance contribution. Let's do another example. Let's say I have an order form. So you are filling this out with formulas, and in the white cells, you're asking your user to type in an item ID. So it's some ID here. Our formulas are going to return the name and the price of that item, and then your user puts in a quantity, and then you'll have a formula here that calculates the price times quantity, which would be the charge. Okay, so your user is typing an item ID. How do I return the product name based on that ID? That's an example of an XLOOKUP where it's going to return information from one part of your spreadsheet or workbook and put it in another part. So real quickly, equal XLOOKUP, I need to look up this value. What is the user typing? And now where is my array? A single column. I need to find that item in this single column right here. We're going to drag this formula down, so I'm going to lock that lookup array. And here's the return array. What am I returning? I want to get the item's name. So I'll grab that column, and don't forget to absolute that array. And finally, what if they type something goofy and I don't find it over here? Notice this is bold because I've typed a comma. That's where I'm at. And if they type something goofy, we're going to say bad ID. And finally, we want an exact match. We don't want to be close. So we'll go ahead and put in, we'll just close it up, or you could type a 0. And now we hit enter. Again, if your user types something like, I don't know what a goofy number might be, like that, and then we're going to get the message bad ID. Now, I'll go ahead and switch this back to 10. Another thing we may want to do in this case is if they type something that we don't like, rather than putting bad ID, let's just leave the cell blank. We won't put any description. And what that allows me to do is to copy this formula down And all these cells are blank, but they do have a formula in here. And that allows, so if your user types another ID, boom, we're automatically filling in the, the name of the item that they're purchasing at that point. So now we can do another XLOOKUP right here, equal XLOOKUP. Real quickly, we're looking up the ID. The lookup array is the same array. And where did I go? Right there. I'm going to F4. And then the return array this time is the price. And so notice I'm on return array. I can now grab that same column. This time I'm going to go Shift Control down arrow and then F4. And the same idea for the if not found. All right, I keep typing a comma. I'm just going to leave the cell blank, close it up, hit enter. And now I have the price. As I drag it down, these cells have a formula, but it just leaves blank at this point. Now, I'm going to show you something that we're going to spend more time on in another week, a different week. But there is this idea of a spill array. It's new in Excel 365, or newer, let me say that. I typed two VLOOKUPs, one to return the name, one to return the price. I'm going to get rid of this one and come over and edit this VLOOKUP. And this is cool. Remember our return array. Watch this. See that finger? I can select it. So my return array is J4 to J50. It's this purple column. What if I make it J4 to K50? My return array is 2 columns. If I change this J here to K, so I have 2 columns in my return array, and I hit enter, whoa. It spills, and it's hard to see, but there's a little blue, light blue box around this formula. Notice XLOOKUP up here is bold, not bold, but it's in dark font. But if I click on this cell, it's a really light font because the formula exists to the left and the information is being spilled from both of those columns into these 2 columns. And so now when I drag this down, I can drag it all the way down. Right? I'm getting the price, but I only had to type the formula once because my return array has 2 columns next to it, and that's what we want, is both pieces of information. Pretty cool. We'll talk about spill arrays more in another week, another video. Another example, I have another table that contains the delivery type, and based on that delivery type, I have a shipping and handling and an estimated days. Again, a perfect example of when you would use XLOOKUP. You're asking in this white cell for your user to choose a delivery type. Is it standard, 3-day, 2-day, overnight, whatever? And based on that selection, I want to return how many days it's going to take to deliver this. Perfect example of an XLOOKUP. So let me declare this cell, and we will type XLOOKUP, except this time the user's choosing a delivery style. And where's that array? Just right here, a single column. I'm not going to copy this formula anywhere, so I don't have to absolute it. What's my return array? In this case, it's how many days it's going to take to deliver. So I put that, and then what I'm going to do if it's not found, again, you can either leave the cell blank, or what you can do is leave it, because it's optional, don't put anything. And then what happens if the user types something, oh, it may not let me do this. Will it? It doesn't match my destination. So what you would get is a #NA error right here. If the user types something goofy, you would get a #NA error sitting in that cell. So the same thing down here when I do shipping and handling, well, I'm going to do an XLOOKUP that says, hey, what delivery type did they choose? I would choose this as my lookup array, and then I would choose the shipping and handling as my return array. So let's go on and talk about XLOOKUP with a close match. Here an example of how you do a close match. Let's say, notice in our data over here, we have how many days have people been employed with us. So it's all over the board, right? People, the days of employment are all these random numbers here in our database. And our bonus is based on how long people have been employed. So right here, if it's 0 through 2 years, basically, 730 days, their bonus is 10% of their salary. Right here, if it's 7/31 to 1825, 15%, obviously 18% for those that date range and over, basically 10 years, they get 20%. So I need a close match because somebody's days of employment aren't going to match exactly 0 or 7/30. It's going to be something in between there. So that's when we use close match. When you set up a table for using XLOOKUP to return a value when you're dealing with a close match, the rule is you take the bottom value out of each interval, and that is what goes into your table. Another example, I've cut and pasted the tax rate table off the internet for federal taxes, right? Well, you have a salary range from 0 to 10,000, you have a 10% tax rate. 10,276 to 41,775, you have a 12%, etc. If I was looking up or needed to look up tax rates based on somebody's salary, I would need to set up this table and I would use the lowest value out of each interval. And then next to it, of course, I would then put the corresponding tax rate. So in this case, we're not using that. I just wanted to give you another example of when you do a close match. So something else about XLOOKUP. Let's talk about what if I'm going to choose Kathleen Adams' lookup value. What if my lookup array and return array are on another sheet like they are now? So I type comma, don't forget to put in your comma, and the comma is important because watch this. If I take off the comma and I click on the other sheet to go grab, what was it going to do it? Oh, may not let me. Yeah, if I click on the other sheet, notice it grabs the XLOOKUP example, the name of the sheet, and it puts it in there. And that's not what we want. I wanted the cell E5 back on that sheet we were first dealing with. So XLOOKUP, I'm going to choose that E5, and now I have to put in that comma before I click on the next sheet. Now I click on this sheet and go, okay, what column is my lookup array? Same one, shift control down arrow. I'm going to absolute that. And then comma, what is my return array? Well, because I'm already on this sheet, we're trying to return, oh yeah, the base salary. I can grab that, shift control down arrow, and then we will absolute that. And I'm not going to mess with the if not found for now. I think hopefully you understand that. So that's the base salary. What if I wanted to do the same thing except return date, days of employment? Well, I'm going to be a little bit lazy. Days of employment is column K. So let's run over here and put a $sign on the E. And now I should be able to drag this formula across. Now, of course, it's returning the base salary. Well, what column had the days of employment? It was column K. So all I have to do is fix a K and put that there. All right. So now I have the days of employment. Let's do an XLOOKUP where I need to return a value based on a close match. Because notice 1795, that's not in my table exactly. I write it as an exact match, but it is in here as part of a range. So equal XLOOKUP. I'm going to look up the days of employment, comma, well, where are you looking for that? Right there, just in that single column. Okay, I'm going to F4 that to absolute it. What is your return array? Well, I'm trying to return one of these percentages. Okay, F4 to absolute it. Now, this becomes important. What are we going to do if it's not found? Well, let's just leave the cell blank, I guess. Or you could just put a comma, and then if you want to have an error message, just let it have the error message. But now let's go on to the match mode. 0 is an exact match. That's what we've been doing, and if you leave it off, it defaults to 0. This time, we want -1. What that means, we want an exact match or the next smaller item. So remember, our rule was from 0 to 731, they get 10%. So let's say somebody has 100 days of employment. That's in between 0 and 731. So we are going to grab an exact match or the next smaller item, which is 0. And so they would get 10%. If somebody had 500 days of employment, again, 10%. So let's say somebody had 800 days of employment. Oh, well, that's going to grab the next smallest value. So they would get 15%. So that's why we want -1, exact match or next smaller item. So now when you hit enter, this guy has 1795, right? 1795 is in this range, and so they should have 15%. So let's go ahead and turn that into a percentage. So that is an example. Now we have all of those XLOOKUP formulas. We can move it down, and then obviously we could take their base bonus percentage times their base salary to actually calculate the bonus. So that is it for XLOOKUP, very similar to VLOOKUP, other than when you choose your lookup array, you're choosing a single column that has the value you're looking for. And when you do your return array, it is the column that has the information that you're trying to return back to the table that the formula sits in. You have this nice if not found. You can either leave it off or put double quotes to say, hey, just leave the cell blank. And match mode, it defaults to an exact match, which is a lot of the time what you want. But in a case where you have a close match, you want to put, at least in our case, a -1.